my hair looks awful, we're all just gonna have to ignore it. I've not had time to style it and I can't tell how it looks on my viewfinder, so just forgive me that. Hello, my name's Jade and today I'm going to be going through the books I read in January. How many books did I read in January? Good question. I think Goodreads marks it as 8. One of those is the short stories, and there's also a short story that I read that isn't on Goodreads, so the number is open to debate. There's 2 novels, 1 non-fiction, 2 graphic novels, a poetry collection, at least 1 short story. I'm missing one. Oh, and a giant epic poem. So I mean, lots. I read lots in January. Let's just get into it, shall we? There's no need to keep rambling. The first book I finished this month was Saga volume 11. I always think of this as volume 10 and I don't know why. This is volume 11 of the Saga series. If you haven't read this series, it's a sci-fi space opera type, like galactic, intergalactic war type scenario going on, but it's so much fun. There's so much heart and soul, and they often have commentary on like real social problems within our world. As you may or may not know if you're a Saga fan, there was a gap between 9 and 10, like a long hiatus. It was years. And 9 wasn't necessarily left off on a cliffhanger, but like there was a very distinct plot point at the end of 9. And so this series has kind of taken a different direction since resuming, and I talked about this when I talked about volume 10. I will link the video where I discussed that one below. I actually think I did a recap of all the other volumes as well in that video because I marathoned them all together. So this is the first time like coming back into Saga that I've had a year's break. Everything was very raw last time round. I'm slightly nervous about the way this series is going. Felt incredibly similar to volume 10 in terms of like the events. Like it doesn't feel like we progressed. I remember thinking that there may be like some background side plots that are like moving slash like getting ready to like blossom into something else, but I can't for the life of me like right here now remember what those were. Our main character, the one who's like technically narrating this whole thing, is a baby in volume 1. She's just born, and so she's kind of reminiscing, and it was so, the way she would talk about like the war and what would happen was so grandiose that like the assumption was that like this series was going to go to crazy big heights. And that can still very much be the case. It's just that pretty sure there's only going to be 18 volumes total. Like there was the hiatus and that was the halfway point. It's going to be another 9 volumes. And 2 of those volumes have been like barely doing anything. I'm assuming it's like plotted out. I'm just really nervous, like we're running out of time and not a lot is happening. So how are we going to reach this potential that we were hinted at in the beginning? It was fine. I didn't by any means hate this issue. A lot of our characters are working through different types of trauma and stuff. We're not moving. Like we were constantly doing something. Even the ones where we were parked and we were stationary, like a lot was still happening. And I didn't kind of, I don't know, it's hard. It just feels so different to the beginning of the series. I'd give it like, I think I'd give it like a 3 stars. That feels pretty solid. I'd give it like 7-ish out of 10. And then next was the first novel I finished, which was Sisters of Sword and Shadow by Laura Bates. This was like an anticipated release towards the end of last year, I think. I wasn't actually sure if I was going to get it or not, if I was going to read it or not, and then I saw it like IRL and it was so stinking beautiful. I have the Waterstone special edition. It's that really nice like almost waxy, thick, high quality feeling to it, and like the gold foiling. It's just a really beautiful book. This is kind of pitched as like, what if the Knights of the Round Table were women? Oh my god, the quote on the back. An interesting thing happens when a man is defeated in combat by a woman. He tells nobody. Like it had such great potential. It had such great potential. It's kind of set within that time period. Kind of have like this a similar feel, I guess, like in terms of like the lore and like the mythology. A little bit of magic, like a dash. And this kind of has like a similar thing going for it. It is technically fantasy. How would I describe the premise? See, I think I'm really struggling to describe it to you because like a big part of my problem with the book is the plot. There wasn't a main driving force. We're just kind of training for the sake of training. Following Cass, I want to say she's 17. Oh, that's not what I would put her as. Expected to follow in her sister's footsteps, marriage, children, a quiet life in a village. She doesn't want that. She has something stolen from her, and this leather-clad woman shows up and she's like, let's go get your whatever it is he stole. And so they do, and then she takes Cass home with her, and it turns out like there's this little band of knights, women knights, who are like, we deserve to be knights. It felt like there were a couple different plot lines and like avenues that we could go down, and I'm pretty sure some of them didn't come to fruition properly. I don't think a rambling plot is intrinsically bad. I just think the author needs to know what they're doing, and it didn't feel like the author knew what she was doing. It felt like she kind of forgot about some of the things and then would pick them up when she read. Like it didn't feel well organized. What does my Goodreads review say? I was really excited by this, but it didn't hit the mark for me. It had a lot of promise, but I had a lot of problems with the execution. Namely, there wasn't a main goal thread to pull us through the book, and a lot of the side plots either didn't feel fully resolved come the end or left me confused. The older characters were generally more intriguing / had more going on than the younger ones, which again, for a YA book, doesn't make a lot of sense. Your main crew, aka your youth, need to equally have a lot going on and a lot for you to invest. Like, I just wanted it to be from the adult's perspective. I didn't care what was going on with the kids. And our main character, I don't know, I liked her dialogue. She kind of had humour at times, but other than that I found her kind of meh. Didn't, like, I think have a super strong personality. Like, she kind of, I couldn't really place her. Oh, and what was that ending? Like, I do remember it ends really abruptly, and I kind of like the way that some things aren't fully resolved. I don't think everything needs to be. I think it had quite a mature feeling, but I definitely remember there was like bits about it that left a bad taste in my mouth. And like I said, there was a couple of side plots that I'm like, what was the point in that? Because we never resolved it. Like, it just added confusion for the sake of confusion. The learning and the training to become a knight was exciting, don't get me wrong. Didn't not enjoy this book. Like, I enjoyed parts of it, definitely. I didn't have any major problems with the writing per se. I don't know if this is her first YA fantasy. I know she's definitely written a YA novel before. I have a feeling that's not fantasy, and it kind of shows. Like, Laura Bates actually is really well known for writing non-fiction feminist writing, and she's like done a lot of work for feminism. She writes regularly for The Guardian, New York Times, and others. Her Everyday Sexism project has collected over 2,500 testimonies of gender inequality and has helped to put sexual consent on the school curriculum, change Facebook's policies on sexual violence, and transform the British Transport Police's approach to sexual offences. She works closely with bodies like the United Nations, the Council of Europe, MPs, police forces, schools, businesses to tackle misogyny. Like, she's got a lot going on. I have no doubt that she's a very intelligent woman who can write extremely well. This just didn't feel like the one for her. Either that or it felt like it needed longer, like it needed to like consolidate and work out some of its knots. I'm gonna give it like a... It's hard because I do remember enjoying it, but like when I think back to all I can think was all the problems I had with it. So I'm gonna give it like a 6 out of 10. Gosh, that review was just a bunch of waffle. Next up we have the poetry book I read, and that is The Sun and Her Flowers by Rupi Kaur. I've owned this for a really long time and I've just never got around to reading it. I can't remember if I reviewed Milk and Honey in a video. If I did and I can find it, I'll link it down below for you. General consensus was kind of hit and miss. There were some that I really liked and some that I thought were really powerful. And then there were some that just like, I couldn't care less about. And I kind of feel the same way about this. There were some here that I really loved and thought were really powerful and lovely. Also, like, a lot that just like glazed over me. Like, a lot of the breakup stuff I didn't really care about. More so stuff around like her relationship with her mother and her heritage and her body and herself and her trauma. That stuff I really liked. They're such quick, easy reads that if you're even a little bit intrigued by Rupi Kaur, I would recommend picking her up because it's not that big of a commitment. And you can kind of, if you read one and you feel a certain way, you're probably going to feel a very similar way to the rest of them. I'd wager I know she's got a third one. I've not read that one yet. I'll give it probably like I'll give it like a 7 out of 10 because there like are bits in here that I think are like 9, 10 out of 10s. But then there's a lot of like, I wouldn't even rate that. Like, that's how, like, I just don't, yeah. Next up is the second graphic novel that I read this month, and that is Bodies by Cy Spencer, and then there's like loads of different illustrators, so I'll put them on the screen. The main premise that I knew going into this is that there are 4 murders. One in 1890 while Jack the Ripper is about, one in 1940 while the Blitz is about, one in 2014, which I think is more or less when it was written, so like modern day, when there's like racist rioters rampaging in the city, one in 2050 when there's like a weird pulse wave memory scrambling plague going on. So in all 4 of these time periods there's murder on the exact same street in London, and it's the exact same victim who dies the exact same way. in all 4 of these times. And that like intrigued the hell out of me. It was also recently turned into a Netflix show, and so I wanted to watch the show. Like the teaser looks really intriguing to me. After having read this, I have yet to watch the show. This is another one. I don't know how to feel about it. Like that premise is so cool, and again so much potential. I don't even hate how it went down. It was definitely confusing. Each time period as well has a different illustrator, which is why there's so many names. I really like that. I wrote in my Goodreads review, I feel like either it's really clever or overly convoluted, and either way it's definitely strange with a message I'm not sure I love. I stand by that. Either like this is all connecting in a really interesting deep way and I just haven't quite put all the pieces of the puzzle together yet, or it's overly convoluted. Certain aspects of the way it came together that were really interesting and like I immediately was like, oh, that makes sense. But then there were other parts that I was like, wait, to a certain degree you just have to let go and go with it. I feel like there's a big aspect in here that you're not really supposed to understand, and that's why I'm like, which way is it leaning? I really can't tell. It's because I really don't know what to think about it. I definitely enjoyed the read. I liked the pacing, I liked the art styles. I was invested in quite a few of the storylines actually. I'm glad I read it. I wrote my Goodreads review. I hope the show will bring me some clarity, so I need to get on that. Maybe that will change my opinion, but for now, I'm confused. I'll probably give it like I don't want to give it anything lower than a 7 because I read it pretty quickly. I did enjoy it. Next up is the non-fiction, and that is Witchcraft, A History in 13 Trials by Marian Gibson. This one was just like really cooling to me. Like I didn't know what to read after I finished Sisters of Sword and Shadow. And I was looking at this one, I was like, yeah, I could do some witchcraft. I bought this towards the end of November, so I'm actually really glad that I've like read it. I feel like the longer books sit on your shelf, the harder it is to pick them up. So I'm glad that I've like not done that with this one. This is my first like non-fiction witchcraft book. I mean, it pretty much does what it says on the tin. We take 13 kind of case studies of these different witch trials and we break them down, and it includes like wider history of the time period. It includes a lot of knowledge about like witchcraft and witch trials in general to like again provide context for the specific trial. And I really like when non-fiction historical books, history, you know what I mean, use that kind of case study way of teaching us. So it's broken into 3 parts. The first part is the biggest part, and it's the one that I think most of us will think of when we think of witch trials, and it's kind of the ye old witch trials of yore that are kind of attached to demonology. Second one is when it's kind of becoming a little more modernized, and it's kind of the laws were changed and it was more about like, rather than I think you're actually a witch, like I think you're calling us and pretending you're a witch when you're not, that kind of vibe. And then the last part is like modern day, like what's going on now, where is the world up now with witchcraft, why are there still witch trials and what the hell is going on with that. And I loved that setup because it was so fascinating seeing how it like is brought into modern day and seeing how it's still kind of around, like the exact same problems, it's just been like put under a different cloak, if you will, but it's still a witch trial. Like it's so fascinating. It was also really fascinating to learn about the demonological ones. It was interesting to see how much of the stuff I'd kind of like had been percolating in my brain and the stuff I'd kind of absorbed was actually right, and how much I kind of knew, but then also have a better understanding of a lot of topics. And I definitely now have like, I want to read more witchcraft non-fiction. This has lighted a fire in me. Really accessible, it's really beginner friendly. Like I said, I've never read a witchcraft non-fiction book before, and I like flew through it. It was so easy to read, really well structured, and like the writing was really logical but also emotive. It was easy to absorb. The subject matter was always handled with so much care and respect, and the author was constantly striving to bring justice and awareness. Like this is clearly something she feels very passionate about, and I loved that. I'm just really glad I picked it up. I think she even has more witchcraft books, and so I definitely will at least look into them and see if there's any that I'm interested in. Just really enjoyed this. I think it was really well written, but it's also really enjoyable. What more could you want from a non-fiction book? Perfect. I'm gonna give it a 9 out of 10. I would highly recommend it to anyone interested. So the next up we have the 2 short stories. The first one is Variations of an Apple. I'm pretty sure this is on Tor.com. Both of these are free to read online. I will link them in the description box. This is a retelling, reimagining of the Iliad. I think the Iliad is the closest comparison point. Is the whole debacle with the apple when Hera, Aphrodite and Athena come to Paris with the apple. It has a very different take on it. It's like sci-fi, futuristic vibes. The biggest comparison for this one is This Is How You Lose the Time, where it has a very similar feeling, in the same way that this is how you lose the time, where you don't always fully understand what's going on, you just have to go with it. The exact same thing with this one. It's very beautifully written. Is the plot, because of that, because you don't always fully understand what's going on, kind of going a little loosey-goosey at times? Sure. But it also, like, it's a short story, so I didn't mind not straining to understand it better. Like, I was happy just going with it. I liked it. I do feel like there's a bigger message and a bigger takeaway, but I wasn't overly sure what that was for me. It definitely, I feel like, has like a political kind of underbelly going on. Yeah, I wasn't, because of the loosey-goosiness, I wasn't overly sure what I was supposed to be taking away from it, slash what even I did take away from it. But it's definitely one that I'd be intrigued enough to reread. I did enjoy it. It was a good little story. It's very thought-provoking, very well written. I loved the vibes. Not gonna rate it because I don't even know how I would rate either of these two. Yeah, I'm just not gonna rate them. The second one is even shorter. I haven't written it down, so I'm trying to like manifest under the name in my brain. I want to say it's like The Dead Brides, something to that effect, and it's about Iphigenia when she goes into the underworld after she's sacrificed. Both of these short stories are both like obviously Greek myth retellings, and they both have like a queer slant to them, which I really like. Chef's kiss. There's such different stories that it's hard to describe them. Like, I think Variations of an Apple is supposed to be very elusive. It's more about the writing and the vibes than the, like, you understanding everything that's going on all of the time. Whereas this one's so much shorter, and I feel like this one's definitely the more accessible of the two. And I immediately was just like, oh yeah, I'm gonna love this. And I did. I really enjoyed it. Because they're both so short, and they're taking up such lofty stories in such a compact manner, it's really, like, I think that's why I don't want to rate them. Like, it's a really big undertaking, but it was a really sweet, lovely little story. If it sounds intriguing to you, I would highly recommend it. And then we're on to the final two books, Iliad by Homer, translated by Emily Wilson in particular. I audiobooked this one. I can't remember off the top of my head who narrated it, but she's famous. I'm not gonna give a synopsis for the Iliad. It's the Trojan War one. It's about Achilles. This is my first time reading the Iliad. I had read the Odyssey years ago in 2017. Gosh. And as soon as I'd read the Odyssey, I knew that I wanted to read the Iliad as well. Definitely think I might be an Odyssey girly. Just every time any kind of list came up, any kind of like cataloguing of names, half of the time they were in battle, which is obviously like, this is a war, because a lot of the book, a good chunk of that time, again, just, I just didn't care. I just, like, it was so, I'm not going to say it's overwritten. Who do I think I am to say that the Iliad is overwritten? But it's that kind of thing where so many words are used when they're not necessary, like, and it's obviously it's a product of its time. This is how it was. But here's the thing, like, I remember really enjoying the Odyssey, which is like, again, from the same type, and obviously they're very different styles of epics. This is very much like a war, kind of politics, like how the gods meddle with humans type of story, and the Odyssey is like an adventure story with monsters. So that makes sense why it felt really dry to me. And in the introduction, Emily Wilson was talking about like how people said to her it's really boring and dry, and she didn't understand because there's so much like heat and passion, and like we're talking about life and death constantly. And so I really wanted to love it. Her introduction really sold me, but there were so much, it felt like getting in the way, and these characters with these intense emotions, like it felt like there was this waffle in between, and I just couldn't get past it. It just wasn't for me. Obviously I'm not going to stand here and critique the Iliad. Again, who do I think I am? It just wasn't for me. I didn't hate it. There were times where I enjoyed it. I really was intrigued by Aphrodite's character in this one. She gets so much slack all the time, and like a lot in this one, like they're constantly berating her and insulting her. In general, like I feel like she just often does, like I just like embedded in our global consciousness of her, like, oh, she's just the goddess of love, who cares. Maybe it was in Bethany Hughes in Venus and Aphrodite said about how she's actually in a way kind of the strongest of the gods, because she can influence Zeus. Like she can make, I can't remember the story off the top of my head, but there was a time when she like got Zeus to do something she wanted, like she got him out of the way by making him fall in love with someone. Well, if she can do that, like she's unstoppable. Obviously, like, that I don't necessarily actually think she is the strongest of the gods, but like I think cases can be made. I don't think she's as weak as everyone constantly puts her out to be. It's just I found that really interesting. That is something that, like, if I had to write a paper on this, that is what it would be about. I can't remember how many stars I gave it like 3 stars, so I'd give it like a 6 out of 10. It feels like a very 3-star book to me. I was about to say I read loads of Iliad retellings. I've read a few. I've read a few Iliad retellings and like watched Iliad, like, you know, inspired films, and I love Iliad retellings. The Silence of the Girls I really love. The Song of Achilles is one of my favourite books. Troilus and Cressida by Shakespeare, that's like Shakespeare's Iliad retelling, and I loved that. It's one of my favourite Shakespeare's. Kind of funny that I love all these Iliad retellings, and I kind of thought the Iliad was meant, like, the plot of the story I like. It's just the way it's written and told. It's so dense. Okay, and the last book we're going to be talking about today, the last book I read in January, was Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. I'm literally the last person to get on the bandwagon. I know. In Fourth Wing, we're following Violet Sorrengail. She is the daughter of the General Sorrengail. I don't fully understand the way this army is broken up, but certainly she's like head of Basgarth War College, and she basically like forces Violet to enroll into this college. She doesn't get a choice. And it's a deadly college. People are just constantly, they're dropping like flies. The thing I've not mentioned, which you can probably like might be able to tell from this gorgeous cover, I really don't like the original gold one. I think it's really flat, and I much prefer this one. I think it's stunning. But there are dragons. This college is all about training them to ride dragons and bond with dragons and learn magic from their dragons, because their territory slash country, again, I'm a little shaky on the world at the minute. It needs a couple of books to really sink in, I think. They're currently at war with griffin riders, and so they're being trained to learn to ride these dragons and fight the griffins. I mean, I feel like the kind of plot that we end up going down, like I feel like there's a lot of things in here pretty predictable. It's funny because last night I watched a reading vlog of it, and I also watched Daniel Green's like First and Last, where he reads like a couple of chapters and guesses what's gonna happen, and the amount of like things he got right and the things that the person in the reading vlog got right as well. Like there are like quite a few things that you can predict, and so because of that I'm not gonna say it anymore. You'll figure it out once you start reading it. I really enjoyed the vast majority of this book. It was so much fun. I listened to it while I was doing my workouts in the morning, and I was so excited to work out because it meant I got to listen to Fourth Wing. When a book does that, that's when I know it's working. It was just so much fun. The vibes were so good. The writing, here's the thing. It didn't bother me for the vast majority of the book. Like, I didn't think it was necessarily like the strongest, best writing I've ever read, but like I by no means had like deep problems with it. As it got on, like the overwriting, like the kind of being in our character's head where they think everything through, but just like constantly, like, and more than I needed, like too much time in one go, we'll say, kind of started to wear on me a little bit. And like towards the end it really was just like, okay, I had to like get the speed up, like let's get this show on the road. The way our lead relationship, like the way they came together was really interesting. I don't necessarily dislike it per se. I just remember at the time thinking, okay. And they both have a very similar perspective because the other one, like at the end, like said very similar things. There are like a couple things that like hint to something that like feels like they're completely dropped, and it was starting to irk me. They do end up coming back up in the end. It's so hard to talk about this without spoiling, but like mostly because of how predictable it will be if I say. And I mean, again, I kind of knew that this was gonna be the thing when I started to read. Like, obviously that made me think, like, do I like the way this was foreshadowed? Because we had like a couple of little things and then it was just like dropped. But I actually kind of liked it because that was one of the few things that wasn't overly like she didn't sit there and put all the pieces of the puzzle. Like, we were left to do that for ourselves. Like, you could then sit and look back at everything that happened and be like, oh, now that makes sense. You could like figure out how it all quite interlinks. The way exposition is done in the beginning, our lead character, when she's really stressed, like entering this college, they have to walk this parapet. They have to like walk this really tiny little like I suppose bridge, for lack of a better word. And so she gets really stressed, so she just like starts shouting facts because she'd been trained to be a scribe. That was a way. It wasn't one of those where you're plopped and you have to figure it out. Like, your character's like, she catches you up. She catches you up. So it kind of, I don't want to say it felt heavy-handed, but it's definitely like we were being told a lot of information, but again, it never felt info dumpy. And I did enjoy the end. It like, there was like a big climax battle type scene that was really cool. It was so cool to see the way like the way our riders actually worked with our dragons in an actual battle situation, because they've been training for this whole time. The magic was really fun. I loved the dragons. Terran. It's Terran. He was my favourite character. I loved him. He was so funny. Tell me why. This sarcastic ass dragon is the most funny character in this book. And I think I really need to read more dragon books because this is the third dragon book I've read, and in each case the dragons have been my favorite characters, or some of my favorite characters. And I love the bond between rider and dragon so much, and the mythology behind dragons a lot of the times. My camera cut me off. What was I saying? Oh! Dragon recommendations. If you have any dragon book recommendations, please let me know in the comment section. Definitely this is a genre I want to tap into much more, and it makes sense because I always love dragons in films as well, like How to Train Dragons. They're some of my favorite films. But I know that the second book has a lot of mixed feelings going around, so I'm nervous, hesitantly excited. I went into this one, to be honest, with somewhat low expectations because I got a real strong feeling for the vibe of it going in, and there was so much hype. Everyone was loving it. It's the kind of thing where everyone loves it so you think like you won't. But actually I like really didn't mind that because I wanted to go with I'd rather go in with low expectations and be merrily surprised than go in with high expectations and be disappointed. I would always rather go with low expectations. I always try and go in with low expectations. But I also had a kind of feeling that I was gonna love this one. Just again, because when people talk about it, you get a feeling for the vibe. It's almost Sarah J. Maas-esque. Almost. I'm gonna give Iron Flame, nope. Fourth Wing, gonna give it an 8 out of 10. It feels like such a weight off my mind having read both Iliad and Fourth Wing. These are books I've been weighing heavy on my mind for different amounts of time, sure, but like both very strong. And those were all the books I read in January. If you've read any of these and you have any thoughts or opinions, I would love to hear about them in the comments. I'd love to hear what you read in January. And that is all I have for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have an awesome morning, afternoon, evening / night. My name's Jade. I hope I see you again next time. Goodbye!